The sound of chainsaws woke me up at 6 in the morning. Not birds, not the rustle of wind through my willow tree's chainsaws, and not just one. Multiple. Roaring like they were carving through metal, I scrambled out of bed, slipped on my boots, and ran to the front yard. That's when I saw them, 3 guys in neon vests hacking away at my willow trees. My trees. The ones that had been on this property for 30 years, long before the HOA ever existed. Their long roots kept the groundwater from turning my front yard into a swamp every spring. Hey. What the hell do you think you're doing? I shouted, storming across the lawn. One of the workers looked up. We were told to take these down, HOA orders. Right on cue, there she was, Karren Merriweather, president of the Willow Creek HOA, clipboard in hand, heels clicking across the sidewalk like she owned the street. Isaac Trenton, she said, voice syrupy and smug. Those trees were obstructing the lake view from 3 homes across the street. You've received 3 written warnings. I never got a single one, I snapped. And even if I did, you can't just tear up someone's trees without a court order. Karren crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. As per Section 12, Article 6 of the HOA guidelines aren't law, I cut her off. You can't come onto my property without permission. She smiled like she was the queen of the cul-de-sac. Actually, we voted on it last month, emergency landscaping approval. Majority ruled. You're out of your damn mind, I said, stepping between the workers and the last standing willow. Those trees kept this yard from flooding every spring. You just ripped out the only natural drainage this street had. She waved a dismissive hand. You're being dramatic. We're replacing them with ornamental dogwoods, much prettier, and they won't block anyone's sunset. By noon, all 3 of my willows were gone. Stumps and churned up soil were all that remained. The roots some nearly as thick as my arm had been hauled away like trash, and wouldn't you know it. That night the rain came, not a storm, just steady drizzle. But even before I went to bed, puddles were already forming along the walkway. By morning, the side yard was underwater. I didn't sleep that night. I kept pacing through the house, watching the water pool along the side of the foundation through the kitchen window. By morning, I could hear the sump pump groaning under the strain. A shallow lake had formed around the crawl space vents, and the lawn felt like wet sponge underfoot. I wasn't the only one with water problems. Across the street, old Mr. Delaney was out on his porch in rubber boots, cursing as he shoveled gravel from his driveway to redirect water flowing downhill. A few houses down, the Martins had towels stuffed under their garage door. The whole end of the block had turned into a marsh. I put on my rain jacket, grabbed my phone, and started documenting everything. I recorded the standing water, the way it sloshed against the base of my porch steps, the dark stains creeping up the foundation walls. I even filmed the sump pump kicking on again and again, rattling like it was about to give out. Then I walked the length of the block and took note of every flooded yard, every pooling puddle, every neighbor struggling with buckets and brooms. Back inside, I pulled out the property survey from when I bought the place. I'd kept it filed in a manila folder labeled HOA ammunition. According to the surveyor's notes, the willow trees sat entirely within my property line, no easements, no shared borders, just me and my trees. Or what was left of them. I opened a new folder on my laptop titled Evidence, Unauthorized Tree Removal, and started uploading everything. Around noon, I drove to City Hall. The receptionist at the zoning department barely looked up. You'll want environmental services for runoff complaints, she said, pointing down the hall. The man behind the environmental services desk wore a tie with ducks on it. His nameplate read Barlow. I explained what had happened, how the HOA had removed the trees without notice, how the roots had stabilized the soil, how the drainage had collapsed overnight. He leaned back in his chair. You got photo documentation of the pre-existing condition. I opened my phone and scrolled through my gallery. This was 2 days ago. This is now. He frowned, tapping the desk with a pen. Those weren't just decorative trees. Looks like they were acting as a bioswale system, informal or not. You ever have water issues before? Not once. Barlow nodded slowly. Might be a violation of City Code Section 34-16. You can't remove established runoff mitigation without a hydrology assessment. Not without triggering a review. Is that enforceable? He stood and walked over to a filing cabinet. It can be. If a third party alters stormwater patterns and causes damage to adjacent properties, they can be held liable. Especially if the work was unauthorized. I filed a formal complaint right there. Barlow gave me a copy and told me an inspector would be out within 72 hours. When I got back home, 2 more neighbors were standing in their yards, ankle-deep in water, trying to unclog a storm drain with a rake. "Trenton," called Mrs. Alvarez from 2 doors down. "Didn't those trees keep this from happening?" "They sure did," I said. And the HOA knew it. That night, I printed out flyers with side-by-side photos of the yard before and after the tree removal. I included a sentence in bold. "Did you approve the destruction of our flood protection?" I left a copy on every doorstep within 5 blocks. The next morning, I woke up to a knock at the door. It was Kyle Peters, a young guy who'd just moved in last fall. He worked for a civil engineering firm and had seen the flyer. "I designed stormwater management systems," he said, glancing at the puddles soaking my porch steps. "Those willows were textbook hydrological buffers. Without them, this whole street's going to turn into a retention pond every time it rains. Tell that to the HOA. I will. But first, I've got a drone with LiDAR. Mind if I map your property? I can model the water flow now versus before." I stepped aside. "Be my guest." By noon, he'd flown the drone, processed the data, and handed me a printed topographic overlay showing how the water now pooled directly around the houses instead of being absorbed by the tree's root system. He even marked the projected floodplain for a moderate storm event. The HOA board met every second Tuesday in the clubhouse next to the tennis courts. I arrived 15 minutes early with a folder full of documents, photos, and the LiDAR map. To my surprise, nearly 20 neighbors showed up too. Some carried their own photos, some just wanted answers. Karren was already there, seated at the head of the table like she was presiding over a royal court. 2 other board members flanked her, Tommy Weller, who owned the landscaping company that had done the tree removal, and Denise Roper, who always voted however Karren told her. Karren cleared her throat. "Let's maintain order, please. We'll begin with community updates and then move to new business. We're here for the trees," I said, stepping forward, "and the flooding." She didn't look up from her notes. "As previously communicated, the board approved the removal under emergency aesthetics provision. You violated city code," I interrupted, laying the documentation on the table. "This is a hydrology report. Those trees weren't ornamental, they were functional. Removing them without assessment caused structural drainage failure." She finally looked up. "You're not an engineer, Mr. Trenton." "No, but he is." I gestured to Kyle, who stepped forward with the annotated map. "I'm licensed in geotechnical and stormwater systems," he said. "And I'm happy to testify under oath that your actions disrupted a natural runoff buffer." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karren narrowed her eyes. "This meeting is for community updates, not personal vendettas." "I filed a complaint with Environmental Services," I said. "An inspector will be here this week, and if they find you violated code, you'll be liable for damages. Not just to me, but to everyone downstream." Denise shifted uncomfortably. Tommy looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. "And just so we're clear," I continued, holding up a copy of the property survey, "those trees were entirely on my land. You trespassed, authorized destruction of private property, and gave the contract to a board member's company." That got everyone's attention. The room went still. "You didn't disclose that conflict of interest," said Mr. Delaney from the back. "That's illegal." Karren started to speak, but someone else cut her off. "You've been pushing that view preservation nonsense for years," said Mrs. Alvarez. "But now you've flooded half the block." "I've already called my insurance," added someone else. "They said if it was caused by HOA negligence, they'll pursue subrogation." Karren stood up, face stiff. "This meeting is adjourned." "No, it's not," I said. "We're calling for a vote of no confidence in the board." That stopped her cold. "You can't just—" "We can under Article 14, said Kyle. "I read the bylaws. If a third of the attending membership demands a vote, the board must hold it immediately." Hands went up across the room. "Who's with me?" I asked. 17 hands, more than enough. Karren's jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. Fine, she said. You want to play games? Let's vote. She lost. Badly, Tommy and Denise were ousted too. We formed an interim committee that night. Kyle agreed to head a subcommittee on environmental restoration. We contacted a local arborist with a specialty in wetland preservation, who said replanting wouldn't be cheap, but it could be done. We'd need permits, soil testing, and a long-term plan. The next day, I got a call from Officer Lanning with the County Sheriff's Department. He'd received a report from Environmental Services. "Mr. Trenton," he said, "we're opening an investigation into unauthorized land alteration and potential fraud regarding the landscaping contract. We might need a formal statement from you." "Happy to provide it," I said, because the roots may have been torn up, but I wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the truth. The county inspector showed up on a Thursday morning wearing a windbreaker and carrying a clipboard thick with forms. His boots sank an inch into the soggy lawn as he approached. I met him halfway down the walkway, still muddy from runoff. He introduced himself as Curtis Lang, Civil Enforcement Division. He didn't waste time with small talk. "You're the homeowner who filed the initial complaint." "That's right," I said, handing him a sealed envelope. "It's a copy of the hydrology report, drone data, and stamped photos. There's also a notarized letter from the arborist confirming the tree species and age." He flipped through the contents. "You've done your homework." I had to. This wasn't an accident. The removal was deliberate, and now half the block's dealing with water intrusion. Curtis walked the perimeter, careful to document the exposed stumps, the direction of the water flow, and the pooling by the foundation. He pulled out a soil probe and took several samples, then asked if he could inspect the crawl space. I gave him the go-ahead. After about an hour, he emerged from beneath the house, brushing cobwebs from his sleeves. There's visible seepage along the inner masonry. Drainage deviations obvious. This kind of shift doesn't happen overnight without a cause. He looked back at the yard. Those trees weren't ornamental. They were structural. Whoever authorized that removal bypassed mandatory stormwater review. I nodded. "And the contractor who did the work sits on the board." Curtis's eyes narrowed. "That's a problem." He took a final set of photos, then said, "I'll file the preliminary violation report today. If the HOA can't produce an approved permit or environmental waiver, the city may issue civil penalties. Depending on what we find tied to that contract, it could escalate." As he left, I spotted something curious: two men in polos standing across the street, watching us. They weren't neighbors I recognized. One had a camera slung over his shoulder. They didn't speak or wave, just turned and walked off when I met their gaze. Later that afternoon, Kyle called. "Check your inbox," he said. "You need to see what was just uncovered." He'd gotten a hold of the HOA's financial filings, publicly accessible under the Community Transparency Act, and dug into the landscaping expenses. Buried in a line item labeled "Aesthetic Improvements" was a 5-figure payout to Weller Outdoor Solutions. The check had been cut 3 days before the board even held the vote to authorize the tree removal. Kyle's voice was tight. They backdated the vote minutes. The decision to destroy the trees wasn't made after the fact. It was orchestrated in advance. I forwarded the documentation to Curtis, who replied within the hour. "Received, adding this to the record, forwarding to county legal." That night, the committee held its second meeting. This time, we moved it to the community hall so more residents could attend. Nearly every chair was filled. Kyle stood in front of a projector screen. "The evidence shows the removal was premeditated and the contract awarded without bids. That's not just unethical, it could qualify as procurement fraud." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the room. I stood next. "Here's what we're asking: for an emergency vote to freeze all HOA spending until an independent audit is completed. No new contracts, no discretionary purchases, nothing." "I second that," said Mrs. Alvarez, now part of the interim treasurer team. "We need full transparency." The motion passed unanimously. 2 days later, I got a phone call from the county district attorney's office. "This is Assistant DA Rachel Lynn. We've been forwarded evidence from the Civil Enforcement Branch regarding possible misconduct involving your HOA." We'll need to take formal statements from you and 2 other committee members. Can you be available next week? Absolutely, I said. She paused. Be aware, if fraud charges are filed, this may become a criminal case. I sat back from the desk. Understood. The following Monday, we met with Rachel in a conference room at the county courthouse. She had a paralegal with her and a digital recorder already running. We've reviewed the contract documents, financial disbursements, and the environmental impact documentation, she said. In your opinion, was there a deliberate attempt to conceal the scope or timing of the tree removal? There's no doubt, I replied. The check cleared before any vote was recorded. The board president claimed emergency authority, but there was no documented emergency. Kyle added, the contractor was a sitting board member and stood to profit directly from the job. No bids, no oversight. Rachel nodded. We've subpoenaed HOA emails and internal communications. If they contain fabricated minutes or backdated approvals, that constitutes falsification of public records. By Thursday, the sheriff's department executed a warrant at the HOA office. The locks were changed, and the office was sealed with yellow tape. News spread quickly. The following morning, a local reporter came by with a cameraman. She asked for a statement. I declined to speak on camera, but gave her copies of the drone maps and hydrology report. That night, the story aired on Channel 9. HOA under investigation for environmental damage and financial misconduct. The footage showed my flooded yard, the cut-down stumps, and a slow pan across the neighborhood's waterlogged lawns. There was even a brief clip of Karren being asked for comment outside her home. She climbed into her car without a word. By the weekend, 2 more residents came forward with evidence one had been on the mailing list for the original landscaping proposal, and revealed that the plan used to justify the removal had been altered after submission. The original proposal didn't mention the Willows at all. Meanwhile, the interim committee brought in a licensed mediator to help draft a restitution proposal. The plan included replanting with native water-absorbing flora, improving the storm drain system, and allocating emergency reserves to cover home repairs for affected residents. During our next meeting, Kyle broke the news. The counties filed charges, 3 counts: unauthorized destruction of protected landscape, procurement fraud, and falsification of records. They've named Karren, Tommy, and Denise. Gasps echoed around the room. What kind of penalties are we talking about? Someone asked. Fines, definitely. Possibly jail time, Kyle said. And they'll be barred from serving on any HOA or community board again if convicted. We voted to dissolve the old board completely and hold fresh elections. Every candidate had to disclose financial interests and sign a conflict of interest waiver. By the end of the week, we had a brand new leadership lineup, people who actually lived on the block, not just ruled over it. The arborist returned with a team and began prepping the soil for replanting. He recommended a mix of bald cypress and red maple, deep-rooted, water-tolerant, and native to the region. He also sourced a rare weeping willow sapling from a nearby conservation nursery. This one's young, he said to me, patting the soil around it, but give it time. It'll grow stronger than the last. I nodded, watching as they staked it in place near the edge of the yard. The lawn was still soft, but there was no standing water anymore. We dug a temporary French drain to carry runoff back to the storm system. As I turned to head inside, I noticed something new: a handmade wooden sign posted near the sidewalk. It read, "In memory of what was taken, and in honor of what we rebuilt." No one claimed responsibility for it, but I left it right where it stood. That afternoon, the sump pump finally stopped running. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, it was midsummer, and the air conditioning barely kept up but in atmosphere. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and pew-style benches gave it the feel of a church that had lost its purpose. People whispered as they filed in, some with folded documents, others with crossed arms and stiff posture. The entire back row was filled with residents from Willow Creek. No one smiled. I sat behind the prosecution's table with Assistant DA Rachel Lynn, who wore a plain gray suit and kept her phone face down on the table the whole time. Kyle, Mrs. Alvarez, and 2 other committee members sat nearby, We didn't speak. There wasn't anything left to say. The judge entered Honorable Marcus Denlin, known in the county for his intolerance of procedural games. He adjusted his robes, gave a curt nod, and gestured for the bailiff to call the case number. People of the County versus Karren Merriweather, Thomas Weller, and Denise Roper, the clerk announced. All three defendants sat about 20 feet away. Karren's lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. Her jaw was clenched, posture rigid. Weller kept twisting his wedding band. Denise stared at the table, hands folded like she was praying. Rachel stood first. Your Honor, the state presents charges of unauthorized alteration of protected landscape, misappropriation of community funds, and deliberate falsification of governing documents. We intend to demonstrate that the defendants not only violated state environmental regulations, but also betrayed the fiduciary trust of the Willow Creek neighborhood. The defense attorney, a man named Preston Hale with a perfect part and an arrogance you could smell, adjusted his cufflinks before responding. My clients maintain that the actions taken were within the scope of their authority as elected officials and were executed in good faith. Any procedural errors were administrative, not criminal. Judge Denlin raised an eyebrow. We'll see if the evidence supports that. Over the next 2 days, witness after witness took the stand. Kyle outlined the financial discrepancies, showing how the landscaping contract had been awarded without bids and predated any board vote. Mrs. Alvarez read from HOA bank statements, highlighting how reserve funds meant for infrastructure maintenance had been redirected without approval or disclosure. The arborist, brought in by the interim committee, explained how the removed trees had functioned as a passive stormwater barrier and how their destruction had destabilized the soil. When it was my turn, I walked to the witness stand with the drone images in hand. Rachel guided me through the timeline from the morning I woke to chainsaws, to the first signs of flooding, to the night we called for a vote of no confidence. Mr. Trenton, she asked, prior to the unauthorized removal, were there any documented drainage problems on your property or surrounding lots? None, not even minor erosion. And after the trees were cut down, water pooled against my foundation within 24 hours. The lawn remained saturated for days. Neighbors had similar issues, some worse. She nodded. Did the defendants ever inform you of a planned removal or request your consent? No, I found out when the chainsaws were already running. She held up the property survey. This document confirms that the trees sat entirely within your lot, correct? That's right. No easements, no shared boundaries. Rachel handed the survey to the judge. Entered as Exhibit 12. The defense attempted to discredit the technical reports, calling in their own consultant who claimed the trees were likely diseased and posed aesthetic disruption. But under cross-examination, he admitted he had never inspected the site in person. Rachel leaned into her final argument. The defendants abused their positions to push through a decision that benefited their personal preferences and financial interests. They failed to follow legal procedure, bypassed environmental review, and falsified board documentation. Their actions not only damaged private property, but endangered the structural integrity of multiple homes. The jury took less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Judge Denlin's sentencing was swift. Karren received 2 years probation and a 6-month suspended sentence, with a court-ordered ban from holding any position of governance within a homeowners association for 10 years. Weller was fined heavily for unlicensed contracting and procurement fraud and sentenced to 6 months in county jail. Denise received a formal censure and a fine after it was determined she had knowingly signed off on falsified documents. The judge turned to the gallery. This case underscores the importance of transparency in community governance. Power, when left unchecked, corrodes faster than we expect. Let this serve as a reminder that no board, no matter how small, is above the law. As the bailiff led Weller from the courtroom in handcuffs, the tension in the room shifted. Not relief, not celebration, just resolution. Outside, the afternoon sun was glaring. People gathered in small clusters on the courthouse steps, talking softly. Some shook hands. Others just stood in silence, letting the moment settle. Kyle walked over and handed me a folded sheet of paper. "It's done," he said. I unfolded it. The final permit approval for the restoration project. The city had agreed to reimburse part of the cost as a community remediation grant, thanks to the environmental violation ruling. The new trees would be planted next month. "I'll handle the scheduling," he added. "You've done enough." I nodded. "Let me know if you need help with the grading." "I've got some leftover limestone I can haul out," he grinned. "We'll take you up on that." Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood changed, not overnight. Change never works that way, but people started showing up for things. Not just meetings, work days, cleanup days, even a community garden project someone suggested during a weekend cookout. The new board kept everything transparent. Meeting agendas were posted online, budgets were updated monthly, and no one made a decision without a vote. The ornamental dogwoods were replaced with a mix of native species swamp white oak, elderberry, and sweet bay magnolia. The weeping willow in my yard began to take root, its slender limbs swaying gently in the summer breeze. One evening, as I was trimming back the overgrowth near the edge of the property, a boy from down the street rode by on his bike. He stopped near the curb and looked at the new tree. "Is that the one that keeps the water away?" "Yep," I said. "It drinks a lot." "Looks cool," he said, then pedaled off. I watched him ride down the street past the homes that had once been underwater. Now the drains worked, the lawns were solid, and the trees stood tall again. There was no ceremony, no ribbon cutting. Just a quiet sense of things being righted, one root at a time. The sign near the sidewalk remained. Over time, someone replaced the plain post with a carved wooden frame. The words were untouched, in memory of what was taken, and in honor of what we rebuilt. And for the first time in a long while, the view didn't matter nearly as much as what was growing beneath it.